Hello, friends, and welcome to Doug Reads with Friends. This is a podcast in which I, Doug, ask my friends to come on, choose a book, we both read that book, and then we talk about that book. On today's podcast, we have John Bowers, a Grinnell College alum who I've known for over 20 years, first and primarily through his wife, who I actually knew before him, and then have kept up with over the years. John now lives in LA. He's a fancy Hollywood guy, very down to earth, who works in visual effects. He chose the book Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, a brilliant, inspired choice of a book. I had never read it before. I very much enjoyed this book, and I loved my conversation with John. We talked about our friendship. We talked a lot about his work in Hollywood and the work that he does, and then had a really fun and engaging conversation about this book. So please enjoy this conversation on Doug Reads with Friends with my friend John Bowers about Frankenstein. I think anyone who knows me really well and would look at the landscape of my friends and all the people I know might be surprised that John Bowers is in the initial run of people that I invited to be on this podcast. John isn't an obvious choice, so I want to introduce John a little bit and then talk about why he actually is a brilliant choice. So I know John primarily through his wife, Leighton. So I was Leighton's high school AP US history teacher many years ago in the late 90s in Raleigh, North Carolina. And then I moved to Grinnell College to work there. And a couple of years later, when Leighton graduated from high school, she went to this school that she had heard her AP US history teacher talk about ad nauseum. And so she joined me at Grinnell. And there she met and sang with and fell in love with a young man from Wisconsin. Am I getting that right?
You are getting that right. Well done.
And as I recall, a Russian major?
I was a double major in Russian and mathematics.
And they fell in love and they married. And my daughters were the flower girls in their wedding. And John and I have kept in touch ever since. So the original idea for Doug Reads with Friends was a website. And the original idea was that I was going to ask friends to choose a book. We would each write about the book. I would post all of this on a website. And then as podcasting became more and more popular, easier and easier to do, I transformed the idea into a podcast. But back in the day, I had enough momentum behind the website that I decided to maybe test it out. And I thought, you know who the first person is I want to do this with? John Bowers. You know why? I have no idea, because I don't know why John struck me.
What's funny is last night, Leighton said to me the same thing. She's like, why did he choose you to be one of the guests on this show? And what's funny to me is that thought had not crossed my mind even once, which just really speaks to the difference between our two personalities. Like, I walk through the world going, yeah, who wouldn't choose me to be a guest on your podcast?
So I don't know why exactly I thought you would be perfect for this project, but I think you strike me as a combination of clearly a really good guy, a really nice guy, very smart, very intellectual, funny, interesting, and just someone who I thought would be really fun to have on the podcast. So, John, welcome to Doug Reads with Friends.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
That was my introduction to how we know one another. What did I miss from your perspective? What does our friendship look like from your end?
The thing that you missed from my perspective is our relationship at Grinnell. You helped me with my application for Teach for America. So before I graduated and moved out here to LA to be with Leighton, you helped me to figure out what I was going to do once I got out here. I taught middle school pre-algebra and algebra for a couple of years, and that was, in large part owing to the conversations that you and I had. So that was, I think, a significant milestone in our relationship before, obviously, your daughters being the flower girls at our wedding, which I think that was 2008. They would have been how old at that time?
2008, they were still young. So Emma would have been 7 and Beatrice 5 or thereabout.
I was thinking about the symmetry of their ages at our wedding and the ages of our girls now. So we now have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old. So I was kind of thinking about that last night and the sort of the circle of life, if you will.
So we've opened up a couple doors I want to walk through together already. So Teach for America, how was that experience?
It was a very hard job. Teaching middle school was a very hard job. I was 21 years old when I started in the classroom. And, they give you a summer's worth of preparation, which is really no preparation at all to be responsible for the eighth grade math education of over 100 12 and 13-year-olds. Challenging, but I think it was challenging in the way that being a first year teacher is always challenging. And the difficult thing for me was that I immediately felt like they were all my responsibility to fix, and that I had only this amount of time to do it. I got a lot better at it in my second year. I think that even TFA calls themselves the hardest job you'll ever love, or something along those lines. And I did love it, and I do have some relationships with former students to this day that I really cherish.
Do you look back on that now and see lessons that you learned or skills that you gained or ways that it changed you that you still carry with you now 20-ish years later?
So I work in visual effects now. I work in film, which is a collaborative medium. And a lot of times someone will receive a piece of work and give a note on it and not really be considerate of the audience for that note, or really focus on giving that feedback in a way that is digestible, comprehensible to the person, and checking for understanding, checking to make sure that when I describe what I want to see in the next version of a visual effects shot, that we actually understand each other, and I haven't just sort of said something that makes sense in my own head without actually confirming with the other person that we are on the same page here, and we have a shared understanding of the next step in the creative process. And that I really trace back to my training as a teacher, and then my experience as a teacher, being able to convey information, and not just to say something out loud and then expect that the other person has understood it, but to then go through the actual work of doing an example together, and like checking in with each person, making sure that everyone has an understanding of both the conceptual and the procedural aspects of what we're learning here.
All right. So another door that you opened up a little bit earlier was your kids. And I will say that I have absolutely delighted. Leighton is wonderful at social media and at keeping family and friends abreast of the development of your two awesome little people in your home.
Yeah, the breakdown in our relationship is I'm responsible for everything that's routine, and she's responsible for everything special. So I make sure that dinner is ready at the right time each day, and she makes sure that like their birthday party is fun. And so the idea of documenting things and keeping people informed, and that's all falls to Leighton, and she does a great job at it.
So the impression from the outside is that you're having a blast as a dad. How's it going? 3 and 8. I mean, three is a special age.
3 is a special age.
Full of joys and challenges. But yeah, how's it going overall?
This is the year when we discovered our younger daughter's personality. So our kids are named Daltrey and Osi. Daltrey is 8 and Osi is 3, about to be 4 and 9. And Osi was a little bit later to talk. She was a little bit more of an enigma. She was a little bit more, who is this kid going to be? Daltrey was, from the very first moment that she expressed any kind of personality, it was very clear that she was a performer. Like she craved an audience for whatever she was doing, even if it was just mashing Play-Doh into a ball. She then needed to come and show you the ball and have you tell her how great it is. But Osi is a lot more independent, for one thing. She can pick up, a box full of Playmobil toys and occupy herself for an hour, just, building and creating and being in a world of her own imagination. And that was never Daltrey. Daltrey was always very sort of extroverted, seeking attention, seeking praise, wanting to perform. Osi is not that kid. And you feel like you are doing everything the same the second time around. It turns out that your kids are just different kids. Like your
They're
two
going to
kids
be
are
who
just
they're going to be.
they're each a person, and you are there to discover who they are over time. So yeah. But Osi's talking now, and it's wonderful. And 3 is, you say it's joys and challenges, but 3 is, I think it's my favorite age, because it's the seeing seeing them try to assemble concepts into something that is comprehensible to someone else, and like the ways that that sort of clumsily comes together, and like it's when you get the greatest sort of kids say the darndest things moments is at 3, because they are, you know, they're taking everything in, and they want to share it with you, and there's this barrier of communication that like they're still discovering how to make it work. But that's so much fun, and I revel so much in it.
So you moved out to LA. Leighton was already there. Am I correct in remembering she went to UCLA for grad school in costume?
She did. She did
Okay.
a master's program at UCLA in costume design. And so I moved out here really just to be close to her. As a math and Russian major, I had no designs joining the film industry in any capacity. But there was a moment when we were coming out of a movie and she was talking about the costume design, which she has always done in every movie, be it like fantasy or period or contemporary, whatever it is.
Oh,
She comes
if
out
I
and
can
is talking
interrupt,
about.
she's been talking about costumes since before you knew her, because when I knew her when she was a 16-year-old high school junior, she loved history, which made her a great student in my class, and she loved costumes. And so this is something that has been that predates you, my friend.
And predates you by 10 years, because it was really, even in elementary school, anytime there was an even slightly open-ended school project, she would figure out a way to make it a project about either historical dress or costume design.
So back to your story. You're coming out of a movie theater.
Yeah.
She's talking about costumes.
And I was talking about the visual effects. And it was something that she had already said to me, that field seemed like the intersection of a number of things that I enjoyed and was good at. But at the time, it was like I had grown up watching like Jurassic Park, Jumanji, like just these incredible movies from the 90s, and seeing behind the scenes things from it. Those guys were wizards. They were they were working at a level of, you know, technical proficiency and expertise and like the problem solving prowess that I could never even hope to aspire to. I came out of that theater on that day talking about, it was a part of a film series. And so it was like, well, this movie was different from the previous movie. They've made some different creative choices. I was interested to see when this magical effect happened in this movie, it looked a little bit different. And I realized I talk about this the same way that she talks about that. So maybe it is actually something that is worth pursuing and would be engaging to me in the same way. And
so how'd you do that? So you're teaching middle school math in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a math degree and a Russian degree. How do you pivot into? How do you start off in visual effects in Hollywood?
It's not a field that has any formal educational requirements or certification, or you can't go and get your visual effects license. You know, you just kind of, you say that you're a compositor and then you're just not a very good one until somebody will give you something to do.
Can you tell me what a compositor does? I have no clue what a compositor does.
In terms of how visual effects are made for a movie, compositing is the very end of the sort of pipeline. A compositor sits at the end of the process and is the one who puts together all of the component elements into the final shot. So you might have footage that was filmed on a green screen or a blue screen, and you might have a giant fighting robot, and you might have, you know, mountains that are in the background, and a missile flying through the air, and an airplane that comes through frame. The compositor is the one who takes all those disparate elements and makes sure that they all fit together. And that's a gross simplification of things, because you're also, as the compositor, you're taking a still frame and you're running it through a noise pattern to get it to kind of have some undulation, and you're tracking it in to follow, you know, this point on the frame. It's not just being handed ingredients like a recipe box and then following the steps on a recipe. The whole thing it's more like the scene from Apollo 13, where they spread out all the stuff on the table and it's like, this is what we have. We have to get
got to make it work,
shit back to earth. So, and that's what I love about it. It's that problem solving aspect of, here's everything that's available to us. How do we turn this into the picture that's in the director's head? And that's actually what I've come to learn is really what I offer as like a visual effects supervisor now. I don't actually form pictures in my head. But this is not something we've ever talked about, right?
Not at all, no.
Have you heard of aphantasia?
No.
So there's a spectrum in terms of generating mental imagery, just like there is with any human ability, like how good of a singer you are, how strong of a reader or a writer you are. There's a range. And some people, when you say picture an apple, they're able to see kind of a faint outline of an apple, or some people are able to actually see that apple in color. Some people can see it in 3D and they can rotate it around in their mind, and they can change the color. They can say, okay, now this red apple is a green apple, and they can swap that in their mind. I am just blackness, corner to corner, wall to wall. When I close my eyes, I do not form pictures. There's nothing really resembling a mind's eye where I can conjure an image.
Do you dream?
Very seldom, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, I would say.
And yet you're in the business of creating fantastical pictures.
Exactly, because I'm in the business of creating the picture that's in somebody else's head. And so what aphantasia actually does for me in this context is I don't have a competing mental image of my own, where when somebody says a bear enters frame, I don't immediately have a picture of what that means, which forces me to ask a lot of clarifying follow-up questions. How tall is the bear? Which side of frame does it enter? What color is it? What species of bear is it? Is it a type of bear that exists in the world? Because I'm in the business of making a picture that's in somebody else's head come to the screen, I am forced to do that all with language and with process. I have to find it as I go, and I'm always checking in with the director that I'm working for to make sure that I have actually understood what they mean, and that I can convey that to the person who's going to actually do the work.
That's fascinating.
It kind of works in my favor, or maybe I have just found a way to make my brain do the thing that I want it to do.
So what are the steps going from compositor to visual effects supervisor? Because it feels like there's probably 4 or 5 in-between steps in your career since then.
Yeah. So I started off, and it was the slow acquisition of skills. You develop a toolkit of things that you're able to do, and you develop the vocabulary of when a director says they want something half a stop brighter or half a stop darker, what does that actually mean? What does that mean in technical terms? What does that mean in visual terms? So I spent a good 10 years or so building up my skills and then becoming a compositing supervisor. So not only someone who is able to do the work myself, but it's someone who could lead a team, could make sure that I'm building up the skills of the various people on that team. So I was a compositing supervisor for a little while, and then I came to a realization. I was a compositing supervisor on The Force Awakens. I was climbing a ladder of ever greater responsibility, and what I realized was I didn't envy the life of anyone who was above me on that ladder. They were working around the clock. They were never seeing their families. I watched marriages fall apart. I watched people burn out, and I didn't want that. But what I really relished, what I really enjoyed, was actually putting my hands on shots and actually doing the work. Not the sort of high-level supervisory stuff, but actually sitting down and having the puzzle to solve, spreading out the pieces on the table and figuring out how they can all fit together. I made that work for 7 years, and I would go show to show, and I would be hired as an in-house compositor. I could happily have done that for 30 more years if they would let me. And the thing is that everybody who actually works for the film company, who works for the film production, is a member of a union. Visual effects is not unionized. But when you're working in a department, like a post-production team, where everybody else is unionized, it means that they get those holidays off. They're working reasonable hours. They're not working 16-hour days and 7-day weeks the way that people do when you're actually working for a visual effects company. But then the strikes happened in 2023, and everything immediately shut down from writing to actual production. But visual effects was okay for a while because we're post-production, so there's a lag. So I was on a show at the time. I was working on a Godzilla show that is on Apple TV. It's called Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. And that carried me through the summer of the strikes. But then when I was looking for my next job at the end of the summer, that production shutdown had worked its way through the pipeline and was now affecting post, because usually in the fall, you're working on whatever shot in the summer, but nothing shot that summer. But a friend called me and offered me a job. They had to let go a visual effects supervisor on this show called Ripley. And I talked to the producer on that, who's a guy I've known for like 10 years. And he said, I think that you might be the person who can step in and kind of right this ship and see it through. And I was like, thank you very much. That's just, I don't want that level of responsibility, because, at that point, I had a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. It was not the moment for me to be able to say, yeah, I'm going to take on a bunch more responsibility and never see my kids. And the other downside of taking that job is that it was going to be in New York. And so I said, no, thank you. I'm going to find the type of job that I'm comfortable with. But then the weeks continued to pass and I didn't find anything. So I said, okay, here's the deal. I will take this job, but I need to be home every weekend. So every Sunday, I would get on a plane. Every Sunday night, I would get on a red eye and fly to New York, land, and be driven to the office. And then I would work all week. And then on Friday afternoon, I would get on another red eye and I would be home in time to spend Saturday and Sunday at home with my kids. That was the changeover for me from being primarily a visual effects artist to now primarily being a supervisor who also, as often as I can, actually get on the box and actually do some shot work, because that is actually still where I'm happiest.
But you've worked on some big things, right? I mean, you mentioned Star Wars. We had an email exchange earlier where you dropped a little, I can't meet then because I've got a Lord of the Rings thing at that time. What are some of the other big projects that you've worked on?
So I worked on 2 Star Trek movies. I was on Star Trek Into Darkness and then Star Trek Beyond. I did the Godzilla show, Legacy of Monsters. I've worked on a Marvel movie. I worked on a DC TV show that just came out this year, Peacemaker, which was so much fun. That was so much fun to work on.
What makes something particularly fun to work on from a visual effects standpoint?
There is nothing more delightful than to work for a director who has retained the capacity to be delighted. Because making a movie or making a TV show is this massive undertaking. And as a director, you have 1,000 different decisions to make every day. And so to retain the capacity to receive something with a sort of fresh, most childlike perspective, to be able to delight in it is wonderful. It's wonderful to work with somebody like that. I found that James Gunn is very much that kind of person. I think he wrote every episode of Peacemaker. He was the showrunner. And so he was the person that would review all of the work. And, he'd be watching a version of something that he had written a year ago and he had filmed 6 months ago. But then to see it in its completed form, he'd be like doubled over laughing and standing up and taking a video with his phone and, texting it to the actor immediately. It's so fun to work for someone and to work with a team that is able to remember that this is all deeply silly. Like what I do for a living is deeply silly. We show up and we try to do the absolute best work that we can and we hold ourselves to a really high standard, but it's important to maintain that perspective and to still be able to delight in it. That's what makes a show fun for me.
But that brings us back to the theme or the idea that you mentioned earlier of kind of childlike wonder and delight. So I do want to start moving into the book that you chose. And I have to say, I did, I think, a silent golf clap when you sent me the email that said what book you had chosen. I was like, oh, that's a really good choice. And I'm really excited to read this book, which I had never read before.
You had never read. So I read it when I was a kid. I read it like as a teenager and I wanted to come back to it, but you had never read it before. That's so interesting.
Tell us a little bit about what you chose and why.
So I chose Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which is a book that did you think that you knew this book before we read it?
I thought I knew this book and I was so wrong. I mean, that's one of the things I want to talk about in this is this book totally shocked me and blew me away. And I would like from the start say, I loved this book. Like this may be like a top 10 all-time book for me, but I had no clue what it actually was. What I thought it was and what it actually is are 2 completely different things.
I read an article about AI because everything in the world is about AI right now and speculating about it and which way is it going to go. It was the Atlantic article where it was talking about how AI is sort of grown. Once it's created, it's not fully in our control. And so that theme reminded me of having read Frankenstein, lo these many years ago, and sort of wanting to return to it, because I feel like that is one thing that was actually lifted from the book and borrowed into the movie, was this idea of the experience of creation and the idea of not being fully in control of the thing that you created. Though that's what the film actually does have directly from the book, or all of the film adaptations.
Now,
really
when
do
you say
have.
the film, which one are you talking about?
I'm talking about 1931. I'm talking about Boris
Okay.
Karloff.
I was excited about this. I did a little bit of a deep dive. I had never seen the 1931 film. I rented that and watched that. Then I watched the Benicio del Toro that just came out this year. And let me say this. This is the fourth podcast in this series. The other podcasts, we've been very careful not to spoil books. I'm just right now going to say,
this book was written.
You've had 207 years to read this book. We're spoiling it. We're talking about all of it. Okay. So, spoiler alert. There's a creature. He kills several people. Yeah, etc. We're getting into it.
It was funny. After I was the visual effects supervisor on Ripley, I did an episode of a podcast where the host of that podcast kept like caveating that we were going to discuss spoilers. I'm like, this is a book that came out 60 years ago and has been adapted for the screen multiple times. Like, I'm not going to worry about, like, Dickie dies in a boat. You can know that.
You mentioned earlier, is this a book that what did I think I knew? And I realized that everything I thought I knew was from the 1931 version, right? Like, this is the book, the copy that I read. That cover, I don't think reflects the book very well, right? I mean, it reflects the image that we have of this square-headed green monster with bolts in his neck.
Like, the image of the creature as it's described, it doesn't. And that's actually, this is an interesting thing with like reading a novel with my aphantasia brain. The creature is only ever kind of abstractly described. I'm very alive to that fact. Like, other than kind of a general description of scale and a lot of descriptive language about how repulsive it is to behold, we're not told what this creature looks like.
No, a little bit about the eyes, right?
We get kind of a color palette. We get a description of the color of the eyes and the color of the lips.
This is a creature that reads Milton, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a quote. A quote I pulled. Quote: "He is eloquent and persuasive." Right. That is a direct opposition to the 1931 kind of lurking, does not speak, kind of stiff-legged, waving things off monster. Yeah. This creature is smart and interesting and loving and tender and empathetic. I mean, you care about the creature.
Wants to be those things, but like expresses this deep and all-encompassing loneliness that has built up into this well of rage and resentment that it then acts out, and it lashes out to take revenge on Frankenstein, like on Victor.
One thing I thought of while reading this is I don't carry a lot of water for the male loneliness crisis that we're hearing a lot of these days. And I don't have a lot of sympathy for that argument. But like, is Frankenstein or is the creature the original incel? The lonely, like, wants to be loved, is misunderstood, and is driven to rage and anger and eventually murder by rejection from society. Now, I don't think incels have the same sort of excuses that a created monster has, but
this idea of a being that is fully universally rejected from all society, any kind of relationship with any other person. Like, you see the creature try to figure out, like, okay, if I approach this old man who is blind, and I'm very gentle with him, and then he can recommend me to his family, basically, as like, he can vouch for me as being a good guy. Like, that is how I can maybe, work my way into having some friends. But then, there's that moment, the old blind man asks the question, and the creature struggles with, like, should I answer this honestly? Should I cop to the fact that I've been watching them for months? Like, he's going to be creeped out by that, but like, I should be honest. And then the family comes in and is horrified, and he's thrown out into the snow once again, like,
and where he then goes where he rescues a small child from drowning.
Yep.
And what happens? He's shot for his efforts, right?
Because of course he was the one who tried to drown the child, is what the other person assumes on seeing what the creature looks like. And then he tries again. He finds that little boy, and it's like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to this little boy who like won't have any prejudice because little kids don't have prejudice. And I'm just gonna, I'm gonna be genial. And he introduces himself to this little boy, and this little boy is like, "From me, you monster!" But then he learns that the little boy is Frankenstein's brother.
Is also a
and so he kills him.
Frankenstein, and that's the first murder of the book.
It's truly, for me, I think that the creature is a tragic figure, and that Victor is incomprehensible to me. Victor, he's just a waste of life, in my opinion. I think that Victor aspires to be great, and the creature, I think, aspires to be good.
Oh, I like that.
The dichotomy that's set up between the way that Victor spends his time and his efforts, and then the way that the creature encounters the world and just wants to learn everything, and like goes up to this cottage and is like, he can sort of determine that the people inside are making sounds that can make each other have different feelings, and like figures out what talking is.
Yeah, there's a theme of curiosity between them.
Yes, it's the theme of curiosity. And it's like Victor only has, then there's even a line when he returns to London that he has no curiosity other than to extract the information that he needs for his task. He wants to create this modern Prometheus, to borrow Mary Shelley's subtitle. He wants to create a being from scratch because of the praise that he is certain will come his way for having, accomplished this incredible achievement. Not to fix a problem, not to be able to help people whose loved ones have died, not to cure some disease. He just wants to be understood as a great man.
Yeah, I think you've thought more deeply about Victor than I have in this book.
Victor sucks. That year and a half that the creature flees, and he, like, Victor just sinks into this despair of having created this ugly being. That's actually what's most incomprehensible to me about Victor, is that in all of the film versions of Frankenstein, I think I haven't seen the Del Toro one yet, but in all of the film versions of Frankenstein, and actually in Young Frankenstein, Victor is excited about the creature that he's created. We have that like, it's alive moment, and it's the creature who then immediately goes to violence. The creature, like, whether it's sea is fire or whatever, like the creature has these unstoppable animal urges and just, is this monstrous thing. But in the book, Victor is immediately repulsed as soon as the creature comes to life, and then does nothing for like a year and a half. No, I mean, Victor does nothing. Like, Victor like, it's like, man, the thing that I made was bad. Like, I'm sad about it.
I wonder where it went.
He just sits around and is sad about it for a year and a half. And then we cut to the creature who's like discovering what flowers smell like for the first time. Describing the
creature's
moon
absolutely
arcing
much more
through the
likable.
sky. When you only know the movies, you think that, or like when you don't even know the movies, you think that Frankenstein is the name of the monster. But then you come to a greater understanding, and you realize Frankenstein is the name of the scientist. But then when you come to an even greater understanding and read the book, you realize that no, Frankenstein, the scientist, is the monster. So Frankenstein is the name of the monster.
How did you do with the language? One of the concerns I had when I first picked this up was like, all right, I'm dealing with early 19th century language. This is going to be off-putting. It's going to be hard to read. I'm going to struggle with it. How did you find that?
Two things on that. First of all, big part of the reason that I chose to be a Russian major was that I loved like the 19th century Russian novels. Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Turgenev, like all of those, reading those, encountering those authors in high school, I felt like I was unlocking the secrets of the universe. And I was certain that, like, if I could just read Crime and Punishment in the original Russian, like, then I would actually understand what life is all about. And it worked. And then now I do.
Enlighten us, please.
So I have like an underlying affinity for like these 19th century novels, and like I have a comfort with it kind of from that perspective. But also I found that I thought that the first half of this book, I found it to be a real slog. Like when it's just letters going back and forth, I'm like I don't like, and I even knew, I had read the book before, and so I knew the structure of it, that it has this kind of concentric structure that, you begin and end with the ship captain, and then you get You get Victor's story in between there, and then in the very heart of it, you have the creature's story. But like I just found all of the letter writing to be really hard to get through on this read. But then when
Interesting.
it finally got to Victor meeting the creature, like even the trial, the trial that happens, I'm like, yeah, come on. But then when it's actually the meeting of the two main characters, the meeting between Victor and the creature that then leads to the creature actually telling his side of the story, I read the rest of it in like one night. So yeah. Well, how did you find it? Like you had an anxiety about the language like before undertaking it, but how did it grab you when you actually were reading it?
It took a little bit of adjustment on my part, and then I flowed into it very quickly. And in fact, I would say that one of the things I appreciated and I was thinking about a lot as I was reading it was connecting with 200 years of people who have read this book, right?
Yeah.
And just thinking about over the centuries, since the early 1800s, what life who was reading this book in the Civil War or through the Great Depression, or, my great grandparents could have read this book. And so I enjoyed that part of it. It was a little off-putting at first, but it's lovely. And I asked you to pick out a quote. I had a quote as well, one that resonated with me. Although I abhor society, wished to view again mountains and streams and all the wondrous works with which nature adorns her chosen dwelling places. It's like, same, bestie. Yeah, I abhor society. I just want to go hang out in nature. I will absolutely go do that. Will you read something from us? Something that resonated with you?
So just the very beginning of the creature's story. It is with considerable difficulty that I remember the original era of my being. All the events of that period appear confused and indistinct. A strange multiplicity of sensations seized me, and I saw, felt, heard, and smelt at the same time. And it was, indeed, a long time before I learned to distinguish between the operations of my various senses. By degrees, I remember, a stronger light pressed upon my nerves so that I was obliged to shut my eyes. Darkness then came over me and troubled me. But hardly had I felt this when, by opening my eyes, as I now suppose, the light poured in upon me again. I walked, and, I believe, descended, but I presently found a great alteration in my senses. Before, dark and opaque bodies had surrounded me, impervious to my touch or sight, but I now found that I could wander on at liberty, with no obstacles which I could not either surmount or avoid. The creature's describing being born, describing the experience of birth and the overwhelming assault on the senses that is your very first moment of consciousness. The sort of elemental simplicity of that language. Wonder if the fact of being written by a woman plays into this. That there is, especially in the early 19th century, there was a division of labor where if you were a man, you didn't really concern yourself with the care of children. But as a woman, you were alive to the early stages of human development. And you would be, if you were also had the mind of a great writer, you would be alive to what it might be to experience that. You might actually try to put yourself into the perspective of a baby and to understand, the motivations that would cause someone to behave the way that a baby does. Babies and toddlers are little scientists, and we get to see the creature be a little scientist like that.
What role does reading play in your life generally today?
I mostly read the same very short books with lots of pictures over and over again. Goodnight Moon is a banger.
It's a banger, man. It's hard to top that one.
Love that book. I do not read for pleasure very much. So this is the only novel that I read this year.
John, it'll come back. Yeah, I mean, when my daughters were that age, I remember we had the collected works of Madeline in one book. And I had that book memorized to the point where I could lie there with my eyes closed.
And you could say that Miss Flavel turned on the light and said something is not right.
But I remember I could glance at a page, one eye open, clock what the story was on the next page, close my eyes so I could get just the briefest amount of rest as I recited that page from memory, and then turn the page and do it on the next page as well. The crack in the ceiling that sometimes had the habit of looking like a rabbit, right? It goes deep. It goes deep. But that's the joy of it as well. And Thankfully my daughters are
And
both
it is
now.
important as a father to retain the capacity to be delighted, despite all of the,
Let us, neither of us be the Victor Frankenstein of our children's lives, right? Let us be engaged and delighted and thrilled by them the same way that your director that you loved working with was as well. So we just start to wrap things up. One thing I asked you to do is imagining what our next meeting, it's been a long time, but if we were to get to meet again, perhaps inspired by Frankenstein, what might be some elements of the story of where we meet next?
Well, Douglas, I've pursued you across the years and across the continent, and I envision that our next meeting will be out on the Arctic, on a frozen wasteland of ice. Each of us driving our dog sled, each of us driving further and further from society and further towards madness until one of us inevitably must die at the hands of the other. That is where we will meet next.
That's good to me.
Yeah.
I was maybe thinking the Orkney Islands.
Oh man, the disdain with which Victor describes that island. I'm like, go easy on that. Like, who hurt Mary Shelley that she describes that island with so much disdain? Like, who did she hate who lived on that specific island?
I actually did some Googling of which Orkney Island they think it actually is.
And they were like, we couldn't find any of the Orkneys that are this shitty sounding. Like, you couldn't find. Yeah. I mean, I guess we could hang out in the Alps. We could meet
go to the
at a little
Alps.
cottage with a lake. And then I'll be in my cave up on the mountain, and then you can come up and we can light a fire and talk about life.
I would like our
dads.
little creatures to come with us. I've never had the delight of getting to meet your daughters in person, though I have absolutely treasured watching them grow up on social media. So, and maybe your flower girls who are all now grown up, maybe they can join us in the Alps or the Orkneys, wherever we are. Perfect.
Sounds beautiful.
John, thank you so much. This has been a total delight. I really appreciate the opportunity to read this book and to talk with you about it and catch up a little bit. And thanks for being my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you, folks. Thank you for listening. Thank you to John Bowers for a really fun, engaging, interesting conversation. Again, brilliant choice of a book. I'm so glad that I got to finally read Frankenstein, a book that I absolutely loved and I think we'll return to in the future. Okay, one quick plot hole I want to discuss. Didn't get to bring this up with John, but there are 4 people who die in this book. Victor Frankenstein knows how to reanimate people. Why doesn't he just reanimate all these people? I don't understand this. Okay, so for 2 weeks from now, in early March, we are going to be having a conversation about a radically different book. I will have my friend Ope Awe on. She has chosen a very interesting book, a challenging book, a book that pushed me in very difficult ways. She chose Disrupting Africa: Technology, Law, and Development. This is a very academic book. I learned a lot from reading this book. It's a book that plays to a lot of Ope's strengths, and I am going to rely a lot on her in that podcast discussion to help me understand everything that I read about in this book. If you are interested in Africa, in technology, in the law, or in development, please join us by picking up a copy of this book and reading it over the next couple of weeks so that you can join us in this podcast conversation in early March. If you have feedback or thoughts or comments, please email them to me at dougreadswithfriends@gmail.com. I promise I will read all of the emails that you send. Music for Doug Reads with Friends by my friend, Erin Caffel, who is a wonderful artist that you should listen to and follow on Spotify. I'm deeply grateful for her letting me use her music at the beginning and end of every one of these podcasts. Thanks for listening. Thanks for following along. Thanks for being my friend.